Hello. Today is Friday of the second week of Advent. We have lit the two Advent candles. We're continuing the story of Bartholomew's passage, and today's chapter is titled New Friends. Bartholomew watched from the window in the room he and Nathan shared as the city of Jericho woke. Below, he saw a vendor of fish wait until his neighbor, the vendor of cheese, was helping a customer. Then the fish seller snatched a bit of yellow cheese from behind his friend's back and popped it in his mouth. Over by the gate to the baths, two women in ragged clothes were begging for coins. In the middle of the market, a man lost control of his camel, and several other men ran to help him recapture the crazy animal. A snort and a cough from behind Bartholomew told him Nathan was waking up. But Bartholomew just kept staring out the window, fascinated by all the activity. "Shalom, Bartholomew," Nathan said with a yawn. "What is it that brings you up with the sun?" Bartholomew still didn't turn. "I never got to sleep," he said simply. "No sleep? Why, last night you were as tired as a mule forced to carry the rabbi. What kept you from your dreams?" Bartholomew finally turned around and looked at his friend. "You did," he said. "You told me that the Messiah might come today, and then you fell asleep. I could think of nothing else all the night." Nathan laughed. "It was mostly a joke, Bartholomew," he said. Then, seeing the distressed look on the boy's face, he quickly added, "Yes, it is true. The Messiah could be born today, but it could also be tomorrow, or next week, or next month. No one knows for sure." "Born? What do you mean, born?" "Well," Nathan said with a smile, "when a baby comes out of its mother, we call it being born." "I know that," Bartholomew answered impatiently, "but the Messiah is not a baby. He's the Messiah. Isaiah is very clear that the Messiah shall be born to a woman, just as you were." "But how can a little baby kill the Romans?" Bartholomew asked. "Did I not tell you, child, that the Messiah is not coming to kill, but to love?" Bartholomew was glum. "Yes, you did. But it's a most difficult thing to believe. Everyone always said—" "Everyone, including your father?" Nathan interrupted. Bartholomew thought back. "No," he said finally. "My father always spoke as you do. But I didn't... Listen." Nathan smiled. "It is far more appealing for us to believe that the Messiah will come as a great warrior king to destroy our enemies. But our greatest enemy, Bartholomew, is not the Romans." Bartholomew looked up in surprise as Nathan added quietly, "Our greatest enemy is our own hatred and selfishness." Bartholomew thought about this for a long moment. "If the Messiah was born today, shouldn't we go out into the city and look for him? Shouldn't we be there to honor him?" Nathan sighed. "It would be my greatest desire," he said. "But the Messiah will not be born in Jericho. This great event will happen in the city of David, in Bethlehem." Bartholomew looked disappointed. "I was hoping to find him out there," he said, turning back to the window. "This cannot be," Nathan said. Bartholomew slowly nodded his head in understanding and then asked, "May I go out into the market before breakfast?" Nathan hesitated. "Very well, but stay close to the house of Stylus, and keep away from any Romans you see." With a grin the size of a melon, Bartholomew was down the hall and past the columns, where he saw Silas silently praying in a small alcove that held what looked like a Torah. Bartholomew moved quietly around the pool in the center of the room and out the front door. In the marketplace now, he looked this way and that, overwhelmed by all the people. So many new friends to make, he thought. How will I ever meet them all? He decided to start with the seller of fish. "Your fish look very good today," he said to the man while leaning on the table, head supported by one arm. "The mullet is nice and pink, and the barbel has a fine smell." The man smiled. He wore a tunic of faded blue and red stripes, and he was busy cutting the head off a barbel. "You know fish very well," he said with a smile. "My father was a fisherman," Bartholomew responded. The man didn't ask what had happened to Bartholomew's father, but said instead, "Well, you are correct. This is very good fish today." Now Bartholomew had the opening he'd been waiting for. "Do you think it is as good as the cheese of your neighbor?" At this the man's smile faded, and he said through guilty lips, "How would I know such a thing?" Bartholomew raised his eyes to the heavens. "Oh, I don't know. It seems that I saw something a short time ago that I'm starting to forget." And he started rubbing his temples. "But hunger will not allow it to go away completely. Perhaps if I had a piece of smoked fish in my mouth, I would forget all that I saw." The fish seller frowned. "So, it's extortion you want, eh? You'd force me to give you free fish in exchange for your silence?" Now Bartholomew really had what he wanted. With a grin, he looked right at the man. "No, I will not take fish if you think it extortion. But if you would think me your friend—" The man stopped his cutting and looked at Bartholomew in surprise, which was exactly Bartholomew's plan. Then the man let out a loud laugh and cut off a piece of the smoked mullet. "A friend you shall be," he said, handing the treat to Bartholomew on the end of his knife. "And what is your name?" "Bartholomew of Tarikeh." "Well, Bartholomew of Tarikeh, I am Mibak of Jericho, and I am honored to meet you." Then, as Bartholomew munched on the smoked fish, the fish seller turned to the cheese seller next to him and slapped him on the arm. "Jethro," he said, getting the man's attention, "this is my new friend Bartholomew. Give him a piece of cheese." Jethro looked a bit put out. "And why should I do such a thing?" he asked. "Because if you don't," Mibak said loudly, "he's going to tell you that he saw me stealing a bite of your cheese earlier." Jethro looked completely confused at this, but he did as his friend said and cut Bartholomew a nice slice of goat cheese. He handed the cheese to Bartholomew as he slapped his fish-selling friend on the arm, and he said to Bartholomew, "May you find better friends than this old thief." Bartholomew grinned at the way the two played, and he knew he had found some new friends. The sun had moved a tenth of the way across the sky when Bartholomew heard his name being called. Looking up from the seller of copper he had just met, he saw Nathan looking for him through the crowd. "Nathan, here!" he said, running over to his friend. Nathan spied the boy and said, "Come now, Silas has prepared a fine meal." Bartholomew rubbed his stomach and groaned, "Oh, I'm so full I could not even eat a crumb of bread," to which Nathan looked surprised. But an hour later they had finished their breakfast, with Bartholomew eating enough to be polite. Then they packed their things to leave. With a hug that felt like a hug of a bear, Silas said goodbye to Bartholomew. May our journeys cross again when Jehovah wills it so," the older man said. "And may he grant us friendship forever," Bartholomew replied. Then he and Nathan went out the front door and made their way through the market. "Goodbye, Bartholomew," the seller of fish called across the square. Bartholomew waved, and Nathan smiled that the boy had made a friend already. Then Jethro, the cheese seller, waved and yelled his goodbye as well, and Nathan laughed, thinking how quickly his charge had made two friends. But then the seller of meat added his farewell to Bartholomew, as did the seller of perfumes, and the seller of wine, and the seller of bread, and the seller of cloth, until just about the whole marketplace had stopped what they were doing to call their goodbyes. It was as if Bartholomew were some great and noble king walking through their midst. As each friend would yell to the boy, Nathan would spin this way and that to take it all in, looking as surprised as if he'd seen all the ghosts of his ancestors. As they reached the edge of the market market and headed out through the gate in the city wall, Nathan wiped his forehead, looked at the boy, and said, "I did not know you had been to Jericho before." Bartholomew just kept looking straight ahead as they walked. "I have not," he said. "I just made friends with them this morning." The day wore on, and Bartholomew asked Nathan many questions as they walked. One of them was, "Why do you sometimes wear the hat of a fool?" "We Essenes do not believe in violence," Nathan answered. "Yet when I travel, I often encounter it. Playing the part of a fool allows me to fight for my safety and that of others without using violence." Bartholomew thought about this a while and then finally said, "My father would be grieved that I have not yet thanked you for saving me." "A kind and proper thought," Nathan replied, "but you need not fret. Your father and I both know you have had much weightier things on your mind than being polite." Bartholomew was silent for a few moments and then quietly asked, "Do you think my father and mother are alive?" "Most assuredly," Nathan answered. "Your father and mother may be far away for now, but you shall see them again some day." The way Nathan said it, so confidently and matter of fact, helped ease the pain Bartholomew had felt in his heart for many days, and somehow his walking seemed to be just a bit easier after that. The sun had traveled far across the sky, and Nathan and Bartholomew had traveled far along the road. When they rounded a corner where huge stands of date palms hugged the edges of the Jordan River, then they saw a lake that Bartholomew was sure was 10 times bigger than the Sea of Galilee. "The Sea of Death," Nathan said at Bartholomew's gasp, "though I have found it to be a most friendly body of water." Bartholomew grinned. "Well, making friends is what I do best, so I guess it will be my friend too." A short time later, Nathan and Bartholomew were walking along a point where the road was trapped between the Sea of Death on the left and a cliff that rose 1,000 feet on the right. Suddenly, off in the distance, they heard rolling thunder. Only this time Bartholomew knew instantly that it was not thunder. "Romans!" he gasped before he could even see around the corner. Nathan must have thought so too, because he instantly started looking this way and that, trying to find a place to hide. But the road was so narrow and the cliff so steep that there was no place to go. A moment later, Bartholomew saw 4 horses the size of elephants come charging around the corner, sweat flying from their pumping muscles and fright in their eyes as if they were being chased by demons. The 4 horses pulled a chariot of white and gold, and the chariot held a Roman centurion and his driver, red robes flying behind them like flags in the wind. Bartholomew stared at the 4 beasts racing toward him, so close he could feel the pounding of their hooves on the ground, and he knew in an instant there was no way the driver could possibly stop the horses, even if he wanted to. Bartholomew grew up believing that the Messiah would come as a great warrior to kill all his enemies. He believed this because so many people around him believed it and kept saying it. But as Nathan pointed out, the truth isn't always in what the majority of the people believe. It's in the Word of God. Many people today believe that following God's means following a set of rules. Don't do this, don't do that, and then you'll go to heaven. But God's Word tells us what we do is not as important as why we do it. If we are selfish, if we do the things we do so we can get more for ourselves, then we are being sinful. But if we follow God's example and try to live in unselfish love, then we are already following God's law. Jesus came to earth partly to demonstrate such love for us. He didn't need to follow a bunch of laws in order to be godly. He just needed to care more about others than about himself. Jesus said this in Matthew, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. It may not be what most of the world believes, but it's the most important thing that Jesus taught us. And it's the most important thing that we can ever know.